The sky had been crying for hours, blanketing the world in a cold, steady downpour. On the edge of a quiet countryside village, 18-year-old Alina sat curled on the porch of her small, inherited cottage. The soft rhythm of rain used to calm her, but tonight something felt different. She pulled her hoodie tighter and sipped from a mug of instant coffee. It was then she heard it. A faint, broken sound. A whimper. So soft it nearly vanished into the rain. Alina stood, heart stirred by instinct, and stepped into the wet night. Her boots sank into the muddy path as she followed the noise beyond her picket fence, toward the wild hedges near the woods. Then she saw her. A dog, barely standing, drenched, bleeding slightly from her side. Her belly was swollen. She was pregnant. The animal looked young, but her eyes were weary and filled with pain. Her ribs showed through her thin fur. One leg trembled as she tried to stay upright, but collapsed with a soft cry. Alina knelt immediately. Hey, it's okay," she whispered. The dog growled faintly, but didn't move. She was too weak. Rain fell over both of them as Alina carefully took off her hoodie and wrapped the dog in it. "You're safe now," she murmured, lifting her with all the strength she had. Back at the cottage, Alina set her gently near the fireplace, wrapped her in blankets, and warmed up some leftover rice and chicken. The dog hesitated at first, then ate greedily. When finished, she looked up at Alina and, despite everything, nudged her hand with her nose. That simple touch hit deeper than Alina expected. She didn't know where the dog had come from. She didn't know how far along she was, or what pain she had suffered. But at that moment, the lonely girl and the abandoned dog found something in each other neither had in a long time. Comfort. That night, with the fire glowing and thunder rolling outside, Alina whispered to the dog, "I'll take care of you. I promise." She didn't yet know that this decision would change her life forever. The morning sun struggled to pierce through the mist as Alina awoke on the couch, her blanket draped halfway over her, and the faint smell of wood smoke lingering in the air. She blinked away the fog of sleep and turned her gaze to the fireplace. The dog, still nestled in the warmth of the blankets, was awake, watching her. Alina slowly approached. The dog's ears twitched, but there was no fear in her eyes now. Only exhaustion and trust. "You stayed," Alina whispered, crouching beside her. "You're brave." She examined the dog's side, gently wiping away dried blood. The wound wasn't deep, but the dog had clearly been running from something, or someone, for a long time. She fetched a bowl of warm water and an old towel, cleaning her with slow, careful hands. The dog winced, but didn't pull away. As Alina worked, she kept talking softly. "You need a name," she said, glancing at the creature's eyes. Still wild, but no longer hollow. "Something strong, something kind." The dog blinked. "How about Raya?" Alina said. "It means friend in the old tongue. You feel like a friend." The dog gave a faint tail wag. It was the first time Alina saw movement that wasn't pain-driven. Her chest tightened with a strange warmth. For the rest of the morning, Alina cooked soft food, crushed herbs to help the wound heal, and laid down old towels in the quiet corner of her cottage. When she sat to rest, Raya slowly limped across the room, her body shaking with the effort, and collapsed gently at Alina's feet. That night, as rain tapped the windows again, Alina whispered stories from her past. About her parents, gone too soon. About the isolation, the quiet ache of growing up with only shadows and silence for company. She didn't expect anything in return. But when she paused to breathe, Raya gently placed her paw on Alina's foot. And in that moment, neither of them was truly alone, anymore. They didn't know it yet, but they were beginning a bond built not just on survival, but on something far deeper: loyalty, protection, and love. Days passed in quiet healing. Raya, though limping and tired, began to regain her strength. Under Alina's careful care, her belly, already round with unborn pups, grew heavier, and Alina patted the corner of her cottage with blankets and straw to make a warm birthing nest. Despite being only 18, Alina moved with a maturity that life had forced upon her. She had grown up quickly after losing her parents and had long stopped expecting anyone, or anything, to stay. But Raya was changing that. One evening, as the sky turned a soft lavender and the forest whispered in the fading light, Alina went to collect firewood. Raya tried to follow, but Alina gently guided her back to rest. "Stay here," she said. "I'll be right back." She walked only a short distance into the woods, the axe slung over her shoulder, boots crunching over frost-laced leaves. But the air felt off. Too quiet. The birds had stopped singing. She paused. Then she heard it. A low growl, feral and close. From behind the trees, two wild dogs slunk into view, thin, sharp-eyed, desperate. Alina's breath caught as she slowly backed away. One of the dogs snarled, baring yellowed teeth. She turned to run. Suddenly, a blur shot past her from the trees behind. Raya. She launched herself at one of the wild dogs with a growl so fierce, so primal, it echoed like thunder in the still woods. Her body, though wounded and heavy with life, moved with terrifying purpose. The fight was brutal. Raya fought like she wasn't protecting herself, but her family. She slashed and snapped, forcing the intruders back inch by inch. Alina, frozen, in horror, watched as blood flew and fur tangled. Eventually, outnumbered and wounded, the wild dogs fled into the shadows. Raya stood her ground until she could no longer hold herself upright. She collapsed beside Alina, panting, bleeding again. But, alive. Alina dropped to her knees, cradling Raya's head. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "You came for me. You saved me." That night, as she tended Raya's new wounds and curled beside her on the floor, Alina realized something deep in her soul. Raya wasn't just an animal she'd rescued. She was family, and she would give everything to protect her in return. The night after the attack was silent, but heavy with emotion. Alina barely slept. She stayed beside Raya, dabbing her wounds with warm cloth and wrapping her gently with the clean strips of an old cotton dress. Every now and then, Raya would open her eyes and look at Alina, not with pain, but with calm trust. That morning, a soft snow began to fall, dusting the trees in white. Inside the cabin, the small fireplace crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. Alina brewed a soup from wild vegetables and fed Raya bit by bit, whispering softly to her with each spoonful. "You're safe now, I promise. I'll never let anything happen to you again." Raya's tail thumped once, tired but thankful. As the days passed, a quiet rhythm returned. Alina no longer felt the same loneliness that had haunted her for years. Every time she looked at Raya's eyes, filled with both strength and gentleness, something inside her healed. One night, as Alina sat on the floor brushing Raya's matted fur, she noticed something strange. Raya let out a low whimper, not of pain, but of urgency. She shifted, paws digging lightly into the blankets. Her body trembled. Then Alina realized the time had come. The birthing. Alina rushed to get warm towels and a bucket of water. Her heart raced as she knelt beside Raya, holding her trembling paws and whispering encouragement. "You're strong. You can do this." One by one, tiny lives entered the world. The pups were fragile, blind, wet with newness, but alive. Alina helped clean them, wrapping them in cloth, placing them by Raya's belly. There were 5, each a perfect mix of courage and innocence. As the final one was born, Alina looked down at Raya, her body exhausted, eyes half closed, but still filled with fierce maternal strength. "You did it," Alina whispered, her voice breaking. "You're a mother now." Raya lifted her head weakly and nudged one of the pups closer, then rested her chin on Alina's knee. In that moment, woman and dog, mother and daughter, survivor and survivor, the bond between them deepened into something unspoken and eternal. Outside, the snow fell quietly. Inside, a new chapter had begun. The next few weeks passed in a blur of nurturing and survival. Alina was fully immersed in her new role, caring for the mother dog and her pups. Raya, though still recovering from the birthing process, was fiercely protective of her tiny family. Alina had never seen a creature so devoted to her young. Each morning, as the sun's first light peeked through the trees, Alina would rise early to check on the dogs. She carefully made her way to the small bed where Raya and her pups lay nestled together. Raya's tail would wag slightly in greeting, her eyes soft but alert. Alina smiled every time she saw them. The pups, now growing stronger, tumbled over each other, trying to walk and explore their world. Raya watched over them with a quiet vigilance that seemed to emanate from her soul. One particularly cold evening, Alina sat beside the fire, feeding herself some stew. Raya lay on the rug next to her belly no longer swollen, but still round from the recent birth. Alina's eyes fell on the small family, mother and pups, content and safe. She thought about her own life before the dog's arrival. There had been days, even weeks, where she questioned whether she would ever feel truly happy again. But now, surrounded by the warmth of this new family, she realized something. This was home. The silence in the cabin was a welcome one. It was peaceful, yet not empty. Alina had found purpose in caring for Raya and her pups, and they, in turn, gave her a sense of connection she had never felt before. Her own family was far away, and the people in the nearby village weren't people she trusted anymore. But here, with Raya and the pups, Alina had something real, something that made her feel rooted in a world she often felt disconnected from. As the days grew longer, and the pups became more curious, Alina noticed something extraordinary. Raya had grown stronger. Her coat had regained its luster, her energy had returned, and her watchful eyes never strayed from her family. Alina was amazed at the resilience of this dog. She'd been injured, abandoned, and alone, yet she had never given up. Now, she was a mother, and nothing in this world could break her. One evening, as the pups grew more adventurous and started to venture beyond their little nest, Raya stood, her body rigid and alert. She looked out the small window, her ears twitching. Alina's instincts told her something was wrong. She rose, but before she could ask, Raya growled low and fierce, her body tense. Outside, the wind howled, the trees swayed, and something felt different. The air was thick, heavy, charged. Alina glanced at the pups, safe in their corner by the fireplace, and walked over to the window, peering through the frosted glass. There was no movement outside, but her heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't the cold that made her shiver. "Raya, what is it?" Alina whispered. Raya stood up and moved toward the door, her back arched. She looked at Alina, then back at the door, before walking to her side. She nudged Alina's hand, urging her to follow. Before Alina could even respond, there was a soft scratching at the door, a rhythmic, deliberate sound. Alina froze, her breath caught in her throat. She stood still, waiting for the sound to repeat itself. It came again, louder this time. Her heart began to race. Raya stood by her side, ears cocked, her body coiled, like a spring. Alina knew there was something out there, something that wasn't right. Alina, her fingers trembling, reached for the door handle. She hesitated for a moment before she opened it. The wind greeted her with a sharp bite, but there was no creature in sight. She stepped forward, heart racing. Suddenly, a loud rustling from the bushes to her right caught her attention. She turned toward it just as Raya barked, a protective, aggressive sound. Alina's heart skipped a beat. A shadow darted past the trees, moving too quickly for her to catch a full glimpse, but the shape was large and menacing. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Before Alina could react, Raya was already ahead of her, charging toward the sound with a loud, menacing growl. "Raya!" Alina shouted, but the dog didn't stop. Alina ran after her, her heart thundering. She had to catch up. She had to help her dog. The cold air bit at her skin as she hurried through the snow, the sound of Raya's barking leading the way. Alina's boots crunched against the frozen ground, her breath misting in front of her as she pushed forward. Then, As she rounded a bend in the trees, she saw it. A pack of wild coyotes had surrounded the clearing. Their eyes glowed with hunger as they snarled and circled the mother dog and her pups. Without hesitation, Raya leaped forward, her body moving with the grace and ferocity of a predator. She snarled, her teeth flashing, as she drove the coyotes back. Alina's stomach dropped, and she rushed forward, grabbing a large branch from the ground and holding it high to defend herself. "Stay back," Alina yelled, swinging the branch at the coyotes. "Get away from them!" The coyotes, sensing her courage, hesitated, but their hunger drove them forward. Raya stood her ground, her stance defiant. Alina's heart raced as the pack closed in. There was no time to think, only to act. She swung the branch again, this time knocking one of the coyotes off balance. It yelped in pain but retreated, wary of the woman's sudden defiance. "Raya, get back!" Alina shouted, her voice breaking. Raya took one final swipe at the pack leader, forcing it to retreat. The coyotes, unwilling to risk more injury, hesitated before running off into the woods. Raya stood at the edge of the clearing, panting heavily, her body covered in dirt and scratches. She turned to Alina, eyes wide with concern. But the message was clear. She had protected her family. Alina rushed over to her, her hands trembling as she inspected Raya's injuries. Blood had soaked into her fur, but she was still standing, still loyal. "You saved us," Alina whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Raya nudged her gently, as if to say that she would always protect them. The fight was over, but the loyalty, the bond that had been formed between them, was now stronger than ever. As the days passed after the attack, Alina took extra care in treating Raya's wounds. She applied herbal poultices to the gashes along Raya's body, ensuring that she healed properly. The dog had proved her loyalty in the most dangerous way possible, and now it was Alina's turn to repay the favor. The bond between them was now unshakable, a promise of protection and love that neither of them would break. The pups, oblivious to the peril that had nearly come upon them, continued to grow stronger. They were becoming curious, their tiny bodies clumsy, yet full of energy. Raya watched over them with vigilance, but now it was Alina's turn to help raise them. Each day, she would watch them play and explore their small world, amazed at how resilient they were. Alina found herself thinking about the day she had met Raya, the injured, abandoned dog in the woods. She had been alone then, and now she had a family that was growing every day. She could feel the weight of their dependence on her, but it didn't scare her. If anything, it gave her purpose. One afternoon, after the sun had set and the world outside the cabin was covered in a soft blanket of darkness, Alina sat by the fire with Raya curled up beside her. The pups were nestled in the corner, quietly sleeping, their soft whimpers breaking the silence every now and then. Alina's thoughts wandered to the life she had once known before all of this, before she had found Raya, before she had become the caretaker of a dog and her pups. The pain of losing her family, of the isolation she had experienced in the aftermath of her parents' death, still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. With Raya and the pups, she felt as though a part of her heart had healed, something that had been broken long ago. She had a family now, and nothing would take them from her. Raya's head lifted from her paws, her ears twitching. Alina looked down at her, sensing that something was wrong. The dog's eyes were wide, alert. "Raya, what's wrong?" Alina whispered. Before Raya could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. It was quick, urgent, and unrelenting. Alina's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked toward the door. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. There was no answer, but the knocking continued, louder now, as if whoever was outside was desperate. Alina's hand hovered over the door handle. She wasn't used to visitors, and in the dead of night, it could only mean trouble. Her mind raced. Could it be someone from the village? Had something happened? She didn't know anyone in town, and the isolation of the cabin had kept her safe, but also alone. Raya's growl broke her thoughts. The dog stood up, her body tense. Her ears were flattened against her head, and her eyes burned with the fire of loyalty and protection. Alina glanced at the pups, safe and asleep, and moved cautiously to the door. As her fingers brushed against the handle, Raya moved to her side, positioning herself between Alina and the door. "Stay behind me, Raya," Alina murmured, her voice low but firm. She swung the door open. The night air rushed in, biting cold and carrying the scent of damp earth and trees. At first, there was nothing in front of her. No one stood at the doorstep. Alina's breath came out in a shaky puff of mist, her heart racing. But then, something moved from the shadows. A figure stepped into the dim light of the cabin. Alina's eyes widened in shock. It was a man, dirty, disheveled, and wearing torn clothing that looked like it had been through years of wear. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He looked as if he hadn't eaten in days. "Please." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "Help me. I'm lost." Alina froze, but Raya didn't. With a growl, the dog stepped forward, her stance protective, her body tense. The man raised his hands in surrender, his face filled with fear. "I'm not a threat," he said, his voice trembling. "I swear. Please, I'm just trying to survive." Alina's heart wavered. She could see the desperation in his eyes, but something about his appearance made her uneasy. Raya stayed close, her eyes locked on the man, still wary. Alina hesitated. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm just passing through," the man replied. I need food, water, shelter. I'm lost in these woods. Please, I don't know where else to go." Alina's mind raced. She had lived in isolation for so long that the idea of letting a stranger into her home felt unnatural, even dangerous. But Raya had sensed something in the man. She hadn't attacked him, and that was a small sign of trust. Still, Alina couldn't ignore the lingering feeling of unease. Raya was her protector, and right now, Raya didn't trust this man. "I'm sorry," Alina said, her voice apologetic but firm. "I can't help you." The man's face fell, and he took a step back. "I understand," he muttered, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't mean to intrude." Alina stood at the door, watching him closely, but the moment felt wrong. Something about this situation didn't sit right with her. As the man turned to leave, Raya growled once more, her hackles raised. But before Alina could act, something happened. The man collapsed, his body crumpled to the ground, face contorted in pain. Alina gasped. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Are you okay?" she asked, but her voice trembled with fear. The man opened his eyes, weakly looking up at her. I can't go any further," he whispered. "I'm too weak. Please. I don't know if I'll make it." Raya stood back, her body tense but still protective, as Alina placed her hand on the man's shoulder. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind howling through the trees. Alina knew she had a choice to make, one that would decide not only her fate, but also the fate of the stranger lying before her. The air inside the cabin grew thick with tension as Alina knelt by the collapsed man, her mind racing. The storm outside roared with greater fury, the winds howling as if the world itself were urging her to make a decision. The man's body was cold to the touch, and his eyes fluttered weakly, his face pale with exhaustion. He seemed barely conscious, his breath ragged, yet there was something in his eyes that made Alina hesitate. Raya stood silently beside her, still wary of the stranger, her body tense and ready to protect. The dog had never reacted like this before. Alina trusted Raya's instincts more than anything, but she also knew what it felt like to be desperate, to be hungry, to feel the cold grip of survival. She couldn't ignore that feeling in the pit of her stomach, the one that said, it wasn't just about trust, it was about doing what was right. But was this man telling the truth? Could she really risk bringing someone she didn't know into her home? The isolation she'd lived with for so long had kept her safe. But now, everything felt different. Raya's growl was a constant reminder that Alina was not alone in this decision. that her protector was watching, guarding her every move. Alina took a deep breath and looked down at the man. He was so weak, so fragile. She could see the desperation in his eyes, but she could also see the fear of being alone, lost in the wilderness with no one to turn to. Her heart softened at the thought of what it must be like to be stranded, with no food, no shelter, and no hope. Raya whined softly, her eyes flicking between the man and Alina, her instincts clearly on high alert. The dog wasn't sure about this man, and that made Alina hesitate even more. But there was one thing she knew for certain: Raya would never let anything happen to her. If she decided to help this man, Raya would protect them both. That thought gave her the strength to make the hardest decision of her life. "All right," Alina whispered, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'll help you, but if you cause any trouble, I'll protect myself." The man's eyes brightened, a weak smile crossing his face. "Thank you," he rasped, barely able to speak. "I promise I won't be any trouble." Alina slowly helped him to his feet, supporting him as he leaned against her. He was light, almost frail, and it made her wonder how long he had been out in the wilderness. His clothes were torn, and he smelled of dirt and sweat, but his gratitude was palpable. "Come inside," Alina said softly, her voice firm yet kind. "You can rest here until you're better." She guided him into the warmth of the cabin, helping him sit by the fire. Raya followed them in, her ears back, her body tense but not attacking. The dog still didn't trust the man, but she knew Alina had made her choice, and she would follow her lead. Alina went to the small kitchen area and began preparing a simple meal: some warm broth, bread, and fruit. She placed it in front of the man, watching as he devoured it hungrily. She didn't speak, only observed. There was something about the way he ate, almost like he had not seen food in days. His hands shook as he held the bowl, and he seemed too weak to lift it to his mouth without help. "Where are you from?" Alina asked cautiously, her voice soft, but her curiosity getting the better of her. She wanted to know who this man was, why he had been out in the wilderness. He paused for a moment, then looked up at her, his eyes heavy with pain and exhaustion. "I'm from a village to the south. A small place just along the river. I was fishing when my boat capsized in the storm. The current was too strong, and I was swept away. I've been wandering for days, trying to find my way back." Alina listened carefully, her gaze softening. The storm had caused havoc in the area, and she remembered hearing whispers of missing fishermen from the village. It seemed like his story added up, though she remained cautious. "Do you have a family?" she asked, her voice gentle. He nodded, slowly, his face darkening with grief. "Yes, a wife, children. I don't know if they're alive. I was separated from them during the storm. I haven't been able to find them. I was trying to make my way back, but I got lost." His voice cracked, and he looked down at the floor, guilt washing over him. Alina felt her heart stir. She knew what it was like to lose everything. She had lost her parents in an accident, and had felt the weight of the world crash down on her. But she had Raya now. She had her new family, her protector, her friend, and her loyal companion. She reached out, gently placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "We'll figure this out," she said quietly. "You're not alone anymore." Raya, watching from the corner of the room, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere. The growl had faded, replaced by a more guarded, attentive silence. She was still watchful, still ready to protect Alina, but she was no longer acting aggressively toward the man. Alina spent the night keeping an eye on the stranger, but despite her cautiousness, a sense of calm began to settle over her. Raya stayed close by her side, curled up near the hearth, her eyes always on the man. Hours passed, and soon the stranger was asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Alina sat by the fire, reflecting on the decision she had made. She couldn't be certain of everything, but there was a part of her that felt as though she had done the right thing. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, the warmth and safety of their little family held firm. The morning came slowly, the soft light of dawn filtering through the small window of the cabin. Alina woke early, as she always did. But today felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a weight that hadn't been there before. Raya was already up, her ears twitching as she stared out the window, her body tense. The dog's instincts were sharp, and Alina knew something was amiss. She stood and stretched, the wood of the floor creaking beneath her feet as she made her way to the fire. The storm had passed, but the quiet that followed felt unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Alina glanced over at the man, still asleep on the cot beside the fire. His breathing was steady, but his face looked pale and drawn, and the wild exhaustion that had marked his features the night before hadn't yet lifted. Raya growled softly, her body coiled like a spring, and Alina's gaze followed the dog's. Out of the corner of the window, she saw movement in the distance. A figure, tall and dark, crossing the clearing near the edge of the forest. It was too far to make out clearly, but the way it moved was unnerving. Alina's heart rate quickened. There were other people in the woods, other wanderers, hunters, perhaps even worse. The wilderness was a dangerous place, and she knew it. All too well, she grabbed the nearest weapon, her old rusted axe, and held it tightly in her hands. Raya was already by her side, her low growl vibrating through the cabin. "Stay here," Alina whispered to Raya, her voice barely audible. "Protect him." The dog's eyes locked onto hers, filled with understanding. Raya didn't need to be told twice. She remained at Alina's heels as the young woman moved toward the door, carefully peeking through the crack in the wooden frame. The figure in the distance was now closer, but Alina still couldn't make out who or what it was. The figure had stopped, standing motionless as if it were waiting. Alina's pulse raced. Could it be another traveler, lost like the man inside? Or was it someone more dangerous, someone who might pose a threat to her small, fragile world? Raya's hackles rose, and Alina felt the tension radiating off the dog's body. The air was thick with anticipation as Alina slowly stepped outside, her breath catching in the cold morning air. At that moment, the figure began moving again, faster this time, toward the cabin. Alina's heart skipped a beat, but before she could react, a voice called out from the woods, its deep timbre cutting through the silence. "Hey! Is anyone in there?" Alina froze. The voice sounded familiar, but something in it made her uneasy. It wasn't the voice of a wanderer or a traveler seeking shelter. It was too confident, too deliberate. She tightened her grip on the axe, her muscles tense as she waited, listening. Raya remained by her side, alert and ready. "Please, I need help." The voice came again, this time louder, closer. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need food, water, shelter." Something inside Alina stirred. There was desperation in the man's voice, but also something else. A hint of urgency that didn't sit well with her. She was about to speak when the figure stepped out, from the trees. It wasn't just one man. It was a group, 3 men, their faces hardened by life in the wilderness. Their clothes were torn, their faces dirty, but it was the way they moved that caught Alina's attention. They were too calm for men who had been lost, too sure of themselves. One of them stepped forward, his eyes glinting with a cold, calculating look. "We've been watching you," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "We know you've been alone out here, but you don't have to be. We can help each other." Alina felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. These men were no ordinary wanderers. They were trouble, and she knew it. Raya let out a warning growl, her stance rigid, ready to fight. "I don't want any trouble," Alina said, her voice calm, but firm. "I've done fine on my own, and I don't need anyone's help." The leader of the men smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I think you do," he said, his eyes flicking behind her toward the cabin. "And I think we could make your life a lot easier, if you're willing to cooperate." Alina's heart raced, and she instinctively took a step back, positioning herself between the men and the cabin. Raya was by her side, her low growls growing louder, and the tension in the air was palpable. Alina's eyes darted to the door of the cabin, where the man inside had finally stirred, his eyes groggy but alert. "What do you want?" Alina asked, trying to sound confident, even though she felt anything but. The leader of the men chuckled, taking another step forward. "It's simple. We need shelter for the night, and you need help." But Alina wasn't listening anymore. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She wasn't alone anymore, and her priority was clear. Keep herself and the stranger safe, and keep Raya out of harm's way. I said. I don't need any help, she repeated, her voice rising, unwavering. Get off my land. Raya's growl escalated into a fierce snarl, and the men halted. The leader's smile faltered slightly, but then he raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Before Alina could respond, the man inside the cabin called out weakly from behind her. Alina. What's going on out there? The leader's eyes flicked over Alina's shoulder, and in that moment, Alina made her move. She swung the axe, not toward the men, but to the side of the cabin, striking the wood with a loud crack. The noise startled the men, giving her the chance to retreat back into the cabin, closing the door behind her with a swift motion. Inside, Alina and Raya were safe, at least for now. The men outside weren't going to just walk away, but for the moment, they had a reprieve. Alina's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to the man inside, her voice filled with urgency. We're not alone anymore, she said, her breath quick. I need you to stay hidden. Whatever happens, stay quiet. Do you understand? The man nodded weakly, his face pale with fear. But Alina saw something in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. There was strength in him, even in his weakened state, and she would need that strength if they were going to survive this. The wind outside had picked up, whipping around the cabin, carrying with it the weight of tension. The shadows of the men lingered just beyond the small window, their dark figures barely visible through the dense trees. Inside, Alina's heart raced as she tried to calm herself, her breath shallow in the heavy silence. Raya stood next to her, her body trembling with anticipation. The dog knew something was wrong, and she was ready for whatever came next. Stay calm, Alina whispered, her hand gently resting on Raya's back. The dog looked up at her, a soft whimper escaping from her throat. But Alina knew she couldn't let fear take control. Her mind raced, calculating what to do next. The men outside were a threat, and she couldn't afford to make a mistake. The man in the cabin, still weak from his previous injuries, was sitting against the wall, his face pale. What are we going to do? He asked, his voice hoarse. They won't just leave. Alina glanced back at him, her eyes hard. We can't let them get any closer. I'll go out, distract them. You stay here. The man's eyes widened in protest. No, you're in no condition to face them alone. They'll overpower you. But Alina shook her head. It's not about strength. It's about outsmarting them. She looked down at Raya, who had now come to sit by her feet, her eyes trained on the door. Raya, stay close. The dog's tail thumped the floor once in acknowledgement, her loyalty unwavering. Alina had come to trust the dog with her life, and the dog, in turn, had always been there when it mattered most. The bond they shared was undeniable. Alina had never been so sure of anything in her life. Together, they could face anything. Alina took a deep breath and moved toward the door, slowly inching toward it as Raya followed behind her. With one final glance at the man, she opened the door just a crack, peering out into the cold, dark world. The figures of the men were still visible through the trees, but they hadn't noticed her yet. She knew the men had been watching her, studying her movements since their arrival. The time had come for her to turn the tables. Stepping outside, she pulled the door shut behind her softly, making sure not to alert the men too early. She moved quickly, but with purpose, making her way toward a thick cluster of trees on the edge of the clearing. The men's attention was drawn to her, just as she had hoped. They began to move in her direction, their voices low and menacing. She heard their footsteps crunching on the leaves, and a rush of adrenaline surged through her veins. She had to keep them occupied long enough to give the man inside a chance to escape. Alina knew her only hope lay in the element of surprise. Raya, sensing the danger, broke free from Alina's side, rushing toward the men with a sudden burst of speed. She leapt into their midst, her fierce growl echoing through the forest. The men stumbled back in shock, startled by the dog's sudden attack. "Get her off!" one of the men shouted, but Raya was relentless. She was a blur of motion, her teeth bared as she lunged at their legs, her growls deep and terrifying. Alina watched from her hiding spot, her heart in her throat as Raya fought with everything she had. The dog wasn't just protecting her, she was protecting them both. The men, now distracted and caught off guard, struggled to keep their footing as Raya darted around them, knocking them off balance. She was fast, agile, and utterly determined. The dog's loyalty was unmatched. Taking advantage of the distraction, Alina moved quickly. She grabbed a nearby branch, using it as a makeshift weapon, and approached the nearest man. She swung it with all her strength, catching him off guard as he tried to push Raya away. The blow landed with a satisfying crack, and the man stumbled back, momentarily dazed. Alina didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, ready to strike again, but just as she did, a shout rang out. "Get back! Now!" The voice came from the leader of the group, the man who had been the most persistent. He brandished a knife, his eyes filled with rage. For a moment, Alina froze. She knew she couldn't outfight them, but her eyes met Raya's, and the dog seemed to understand. With a sudden growl, Raya lunged at the man, knocking the knife from his hand before he could react. Alina's heart raced as she stood her ground, ready to protect herself and the man inside. She had no choice but to keep fighting, to keep buying time. But the men were starting to regroup, their frustration growing. "Enough of this," the leader hissed, his eyes narrowing. "We're taking what we need. You're not going to stop us." As he advanced on Alina, Raya continued to guard her, her body acting as a shield. The air was thick with tension, and Alina's mind raced. She needed a way to end this fight. She had to outsmart them, just like she had planned. And then, just as the men closed in, a loud, thunderous noise echoed through the forest, the sound of a tree crashing to the ground. It was followed by a roar so deep and terrifying that even the men froze in place. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the unmistakable shape of a large bear appeared at the edge of the clearing, its massive form looming over them. The men stared, frozen in terror. The bear's eyes locked onto them, and it let out another deep, menacing growl. Without a word, the men turned and ran. They fled into the woods, leaving Alina, Raya, and the cabin behind. The sound of their retreating footsteps faded into the distance, leaving the clearing eerily quiet once more. Alina stood there for a moment, her heart still racing, before turning to Raya. The dog was panting heavily, her body still poised for action. But Alina could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Good girl," Alina whispered, her voice shaking. "You saved us." The dog wagged her tail weakly, her body sinking to the ground in exhaustion. Alina knelt beside her, running her hand over the dog's fur. She could feel the warmth and loyalty radiating from Raya, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax. But she knew this wasn't over. There was still danger in the world, and she would have to face it. But with Raya by her side, the evening sky had turned to a soft shade of purple as Alina sat beside Raya, both of them resting against the side of the cabin. The storm had passed, but a lingering unease settled over Alina. She could feel it in the air, the tension of what had just transpired. The men had fled, but would they return? She knew they wouldn't be so easily deterred. But as she gazed down at Raya, who rested her head in Alina's lap, a feeling of warmth and safety washed over her. The dog had given everything to protect her, and Alina knew that her life had been forever changed by this extraordinary creature. Raya was more than just a dog. She was family. Alina absent-mindedly stroked the dog's fur, her thoughts drifting back to the moment they had first met. Raya had been an injured, abandoned animal, barely clinging to life. Yet now, she was the one who had saved Alina from certain danger, proving her loyalty in a way that words could never describe. "Thank you," Alina whispered softly, her voice barely a breath. Raya's eyes flickered open at the sound of her name, her tail giving a weak thump on the ground in acknowledgement. There was no need for words. They had an unspoken understanding, a bond that went beyond anything Alina had ever experienced. Following days were filled with quiet moments of reflection. The terror of the men who had come to threaten them seemed to recede, but Alina knew better than to assume they were safe. There were still things left unsaid, still unknown dangers on the horizon, but she had Raya by her side, and that brought her a strange sense of calm. One morning, after a sleepless night spent waiting for any sign of the men's return, Alina woke up to find that Raya was missing. Panic set in immediately. Alina rushed outside, calling the dog's name, but there was no response. She searched the area around the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. Where could she have gone? Minutes stretched into hours, and with each passing moment Alina's worry grew. She couldn't lose Raya, not after everything they had been through together. Finally, just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Alina spotted Raya in the distance, standing at the edge of the forest. The dog was staring into the trees, her ears pricked, as though sensing something. Alina ran toward her, calling out, "Raya!" she shouted. The dog turned her head at the sound of her name, but didn't move from her spot. There was an intensity in her eyes that Alina hadn't seen before, something almost primal. Alina slowed her pace, cautious, but still desperate to reach her. When she reached the dog, Raya didn't acknowledge her right away. Instead, she sniffed the air, her body tense. Alina crouched down beside her, rubbing her back gently. "Raya, what is it?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. The dog finally turned her head to look at Alina, her eyes full of quiet understanding. She nudged Alina's hand with her nose, then turned back toward the trees, her tail slightly raised. For a moment, Alina hesitated, not knowing what to do. But the dog's actions spoke louder than any words could. Raya was trying to protect her again. With newfound determination, Alina stood up. She knew that whatever was out there, they would face it together. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Alina could feel the weight of the silence surrounding them. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, the kind that made her skin prickle. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of movement, something large rustling through the underbrush. Alina froze, her heart racing. Raya growled softly, her hackles raised. "Stay close," Alina whispered, gripping a sturdy branch she had found earlier. But before she could take another step, the sound stopped. Silence returned, as eerie as it was unsettling. Raya's ears twitched. She turned, looking directly into Alina's eyes. It was as if the dog was silently telling her to stay calm. And then, from behind a thicket of trees, something stepped forward. It was a bear, massive and hulking, its fur matted and rough. Its eyes locked onto Alina and Raya, the animals, primal instinct ready to take over. Before Alina could react, Raya was already moving. The dog charged forward with a snarl, her body low to the ground, aiming for the bear's side. The bear swiped a claw at her, but Raya was faster, dodging, and leaping to the side. Alina felt a jolt of fear, but she didn't run. Instead, she held her ground, knowing that Raya was fighting for them both. As the bear lunged again, Raya met it head-on, her teeth sinking into the bear's thick fur. The two animals struggled fiercely, their growls echoing through the trees. Alina raised the branch she had found earlier, preparing to defend herself if necessary. But she didn't need to. Raya was holding her own, her fierce determination clear in every movement. With a final, powerful strike, Raya forced the bear back, her growls now louder, more menacing. The bear, unwilling to fight further, retreated into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. Alina stood in stunned silence, her heart pounding as she watched Raya panting heavily from the fight. The dog's fur was matted with blood, but she was still standing, her loyalty to Alina unshaken. "You did it, Raya," Alina whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. Again." Raya's tail gave a weak wag, her body still, trembling with exhaustion but proud of her victory. In that moment, Alina knew something she had known all along. No matter what came their way, Raya would always protect her. The bond they shared was unbreakable, and Alina couldn't imagine life without the dog by her side. With the bear gone, and the forest once again quiet, Alina and Raya made their way back to the cabin. This time, Alina was determined to stay, vigilant, knowing that the dangers of the world were far from over. But with Raya beside her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The loyalty between them was unyielding, and that was the greatest protection of all. The days following the bear encounter passed in a quiet rhythm, but Alina couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still lurking. Raya, ever watchful, stayed close to Alina, her loyalty unwavering. Even during the quiet moments, when Alina sat by the fire or tended to the garden, the dog was never far, her eyes scanning their surroundings with sharp vigilance. Alina had always thought of the forest as a peaceful place, but after the events of the past few weeks, she realized how easily the peace could be shattered by nature's unpredictability. And while the bear had been a threat they had overcome together, she knew that there were more dangers out there, ones they couldn't yet see. One evening, after a long day spent chopping firewood, Alina sat down on the porch, wiping sweat from her brow. The sky above her was a vibrant orange, the sun beginning to set behind the mountains. Raya was lying next to her, her head resting on Alina's feet, as they both took a moment to relax. It had been a peaceful day, one where Alina allowed herself to forget the dangers of the world, just for a little while. But as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Alina's sense of calm was interrupted by the distant sound of a howl. It was faint at first, just a low, mournful sound carried on the wind. But as the wind shifted, it grew louder, closer. Raya's ears immediately perked up, her body tensing. Alina felt a chill crawl up her spine. That howl wasn't from a wolf. It was deeper, more guttural. Something bigger, something more dangerous. "Raya," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. "What is that?" The dog's eyes never left the horizon, and Alina could see the muscles in her body tighten in preparation. For whatever threat was drawing near, there was no doubt in her mind now. This was a warning. Something was coming, and it was headed straight for them. The night seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the trees, and the distant howl, growing louder with every passing second. It wasn't just one animal. There were more, she realized. A pack, moving together through the forest. As the howls drew nearer, Raya got to her feet, her tail low and stiff. She began to pace back and forth in front of Alina, her growls barely audible, but steady. Alina didn't need to be told. She could feel the tension in the air. "They're coming," Alina murmured, clutching the strap of the small rifle she kept nearby for protection. Though she wasn't much of a hunter, she had learned to use it well enough to defend herself if the need ever arose. Raya's growls intensified as the sounds of the pack grew louder. Alina stood up and moved inside the cabin, her eyes never leaving the dog. Raya was already in defensive mode, ready for whatever was out there. Suddenly, from the corner of the property, a shape darted out of the trees. It was massive, too large to be a typical wolf. And it wasn't alone. Other creatures followed, emerging from the darkness of the forest. Alina's heart raced as she realized what they were. The wolves were enormous, but they weren't ordinary wolves. They were twisted, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger, their fur matted and dirty. They were far more menacing than any predator Alina had ever seen. They were the creatures of nightmares. Alina took a step back inside the cabin, but she didn't close the door. She couldn't. Raya needed her to stand firm. She needed to stay strong no matter what. The creatures had crossed into their territory, and they wouldn't leave without a fight. Raya barked once, sharp and clear, and the wolves stopped just beyond the tree line. They weren't moving, but Alina knew they were watching. The standoff had begun. Alina's heart was pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of Raya's unwavering loyalty behind her, but that didn't mean they were safe. The wolves hadn't made a move yet, but she could sense the malice radiating from them. They were waiting for something. Then, as if on cue, the leader of the pack stepped forward. It was a monstrous beast, its eyes a glowing, fiery red. Its fur was matted with filth, and its claws scraped against the ground as it moved. The creature's gaze locked onto Alina, and she felt her blood run cold. It was as if the wolf knew her every fear. But Raya wasn't afraid. The dog stood tall, her head held high, and her eyes locked onto the leader of the pack. There was no fear in her stance, no hesitation. She was ready. "Stay close, Raya," Alina whispered, gripping the rifle tighter. The leader of the pack took another step forward, its gaze never wavering. And then, with a sudden spine-chilling howl, the wolves charged. Alina's heart stopped. Time seemed to slow as the pack surged forward, their bodies moving as one, hungry and ferocious. But Raya was already in motion. She leapt at the first wolf to approach, her teeth sinking deep into its throat with a growl that sent a shiver down Alina's spine. The battle had begun. Alina fired a shot, aiming at the leader, but it was too fast. The creature dodged the bullet and lunged at her, its jaws snapping dangerously close. Raya was there, though, quicker than the wind. She tackled the leader with a force that sent them both tumbling to the ground. Alina didn't have time to think. She fired again, this time hitting one of the wolves coming up behind her. It fell to the ground with a yelp, but there were more. There would always be more. The fight was just beginning. With every shot Alina fired, with every attack Raya made, the odds seemed to shift in their favor. But the wolves kept coming, their numbers relentless. The wind howled around them, as if the forest itself was alive with the chaos of the battle. But in the chaos, Alina knew one thing. She wasn't alone. Raya was with her, fighting at her side. No matter how many wolves there were, no matter how fierce the fight, Raya would always protect her. And Alina would protect her too. The battle raged on for what seemed like an eternity. The wolves, relentless and vicious, were closing in from all sides, but Raya fought with a ferocity Alina had never seen before. Her body moved with precision and grace, each strike calculated, each movement a defense against the deadly pack that surrounded them. Alina, though overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the wolves, stood her ground. The rifle in her hands was no longer a tool of distance, but a last resort. Her focus was entirely on protecting Raya and herself. Her mind raced with thoughts of survival, but her heart clung to the one thing that had kept her alive through the darkest moments of her life: Raya's unwavering loyalty. With every growl and snap of the wolves' jaws, Alina's fear deepened. But Raya's presence was a constant, a force of nature that gave her the strength to stand firm. Together, they were an unbreakable unit. Two souls bound by trust and a shared determination to survive. As another wolf lunged at Alina, Raya was there in an instant, biting into the creature's neck with a vicious snarl. The wolf cried out, in pain, but Raya didn't relent. She shook her head, tearing into its flesh until it fell limp to the ground. But there were more. So many more. The night was filled with the sounds of battle, the growls, the snarls, the sound of teeth scraping against bone, and the wind whistling through the trees as the storm clouds began to gather overhead. The wolves were not just attacking for food. They were attacking out of sheer malice, driven by a hunger that wasn't just for flesh, but for destruction. Alina's heart pounded as she scanned the area. Raya was locked in a fierce struggle with the alpha wolf, the beast that had led the pack to them. It was a fight that seemed almost impossible, but Alina could see the determination in Raya's eyes, the sheer will to protect her. "Stay with me, Raya," Alina whispered, even as she fired another shot into the dark, hoping to keep the others at bay. The alpha wolf let out a terrifying roar, its eyes burning with fury. It was massive, its muscles rippling as it and Raya grappled on the ground, each one trying to overpower the other. Raya's growls echoed through the night, her teeth sinking into the alpha's throat in an attempt to end the fight once and for all. But the alpha wolf was relentless. It twisted beneath her, using its immense strength to throw Raya off balance. With a powerful swipe of its claws, it struck Raya across the side, leaving a deep, bleeding gash. Alina's heart stopped. Raya yelped in pain, but her resolve never wavered. With a desperate snarl, she lunged once more, her body fueled by an animal instinct that pushed her beyond her limits. She sank her teeth into the alpha's throat, not giving it an inch. The fight between them was fierce, a battle of wills that seemed destined to last forever. But just as Alina's hope began to fade, something shifted. The winds began to howl louder, the storm clouds overhead swirling with unnatural speed. The forest seemed to come alive with an energy that Alina couldn't explain, a sense of something ancient awakening in response to the battle taking place below. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the trees around them shook as if some great force was moving through the earth itself. The wolves, sensing the change in the atmosphere, hesitated for just a moment. Raya, bloodied but determined, took advantage of the hesitation. With a final savage twist, she sank her teeth deep into the alpha wolf's neck, tearing through its flesh with a powerful snap. The alpha let out one last howl of agony before it collapsed, its body falling lifeless to the ground. The remaining wolves, now without their leader, hesitated. The battle was won. But at what cost? Raya stood over the alpha's body, panting heavily, her fur matted with blood. She was wounded, her side torn open where the alpha had struck her. But her eyes were fierce, filled with an unwavering determination to protect Alina no matter what. Alina rushed to her side, dropping the rifle and kneeling beside her loyal companion. The storm continued to swirl around them, but it felt distant, almost unreal in the face of the overwhelming relief that washed over Alina. "You did it, Raya," Alina whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved us." But Raya didn't respond. She was still panting heavily, her body trembling. With exhaustion and pain, Alina reached out and gently stroked her fur, her hands trembling. Raya had fought bravely, but the cost had been too great. As the storm raged above them, Alina held Raya close, not caring about the rain or the wind or the dangers that still lurked in the shadows of the forest. She could feel the warmth of Raya's body, but it was faint, like a flicker of a flame in the dark. The storm seemed to slow, the wind calming as Alina cradled the dog she loved. The dog who had saved her life time and time again. "Rest now," Alina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You've done enough." Raya's breathing grew shallow, and her body became limp in Alina's arms. The storm had passed, but it didn't matter anymore. The battle was over. And Raya had given everything she had. As the last of the wolves retreated into the darkness, Alina sat there, holding her beloved friend, her loyal protector, in the silence of the forest. Raya had given her all for one final act of love and devotion. And in that moment, Alina knew. She would never forget the bond they shared, the loyalty that had saved her life. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving behind a forest cloaked in mist and silence. The morning light filtered weakly through the damp branches, casting an ethereal glow across the earth still littered with broken branches, claw marks, and blood. But for Alina, time had stopped altogether. She knelt beside Raya's body, unmoving, her arms wrapped protectively around the lifeless dog that had once filled her days with joy, warmth, and courage. Her fingers trembled as they stroked Raya's blood-matted fur, still warm, as if she might wake up with one more breath. But Raya's chest no longer rose. Her heartbeat, the sound Alina had fallen asleep to so many times, was gone. It didn't seem real. Alina, only 18, had endured more than most twice her age. Life had taken everything from her, her family, her home. And just when she thought she'd found something pure and good, the world took it too. Raya wasn't just a dog. She was her protector, her friend, her only sense of safety in a world that had always seemed to threaten her existence. "I wasn't ready," Alina whispered through clenched teeth, her voice cracking beneath the weight of grief. "You weren't supposed to leave me. Not yet." Tears rolled down her cheeks freely, mixing with the mud and blood on her skin. Her body ached, her soul shattered. All around her, the forest was still, as though nature itself paused to grieve with her. She slowly gathered herself, brushing her hand over Raya's eyes to gently close them. Then she began to dig. With her bare hands, she scraped away the earth near the roots of a tall tree, their tree, the one they used to rest under during summer evenings. The bark still bore the shallow scratches Raya would make as she stretched in the sun. Alina's nails tore, her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. It was the last thing she could do for her. Hours passed. The grave was shallow, uneven, but it was all she had strength for. Alina knelt once more beside Raya, brushing the leaves from her side. She had wrapped her in the blanket from their cabin, the one Raya used to curl up in every night. With trembling arms, she lifted her and placed her in the grave, lowering her gently as though she might wake if disturbed too suddenly. "I love you, Raya," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I'll never forget. Never." She covered her with the earth slowly, carefully, her hands pausing now and then as the grief overwhelmed her. With each handful of soil, she buried not just her friend, but a piece of herself. When it was done, she marked the grave with a carved piece of wood. Raya, my guardian, my heart. She sat there for hours. The mist thickened. The wind whispered through the trees. Birds began to sing again. But Alina sat silently, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the mound of fresh soil. It wasn't just the loss of a dog. It was the loss of safety, of warmth, of the only soul who had loved her without condition. But deep down, in the ache of her sorrow, something stirred. A memory. A feeling. She remembered the way Raya had always stood between her and danger. The way she never backed down, even when terrified. The way she stayed beside her when Alina had been feverish, licking her face through sleepless nights. The way she had bared her teeth to monsters in the woods and fought until her very last breath. And Alina realized Raya had left her something: courage, strength, loyalty. The kind of love that lived on, even after death. She stood slowly, her legs shaky, her eyes swollen. The wind tugged at her damp hair, but she didn't flinch. She looked around the forest, not with fear, but with a strange, silent understanding. "I'll live," she said aloud, her voice quiet but steady, "because you did everything to make sure I could." As she turned to leave, she paused, looking over her shoulder at the grave one last time. Then she whispered, "You died protecting me. Now I'll live honoring you." And with that, Alina began the long walk back to the cabin, her heart hollow, but her soul carrying the spirit of the bravest companion she'd ever known. The cabin stood in silence as Alina stepped through its door. It felt emptier than before, colder, lonelier, as though the warmth Raya had brought into the walls had gone with her. The air was still thick with the scent of old firewood, herbs, and fur. Her eyes lingered on the corner where Raya always curled up, nose tucked under her tail, ears flicking even in sleep. It was empty now. Alina walked in slowly, touching the frame of the door like she was entering sacred ground. Her limbs moved as though carrying the weight of grief in every bone. The fire had long since burned out. The blankets lay in a heap, untouched. The food she'd left out still sat on the table. Raya's bowl was still half full. She sank to the wooden floor and pulled the blanket into her arms, breathing it in. The smell hit her chest like a hammer. Earthy, warm, familiar. It crumbled her all over again. The tears came fresh and quiet. She didn't sob. She didn't cry out. She just sat there, letting the sorrow bleed from her silently. But even in grief, the echoes of Raya lingered. That night, sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and haunted. Alina dreamed of the river, the wolves, of Raya snarling, standing in front of her like a wall of courage and fur. She dreamed of soft eyes, warm licks, and the way Raya used to nudge her awake with her nose. When she woke up before dawn, the wind had picked up outside. Rain threatened in the distance again, and the forest moaned like it too remembered the loss. But Alina did something different. She got up. Her hands reached for the small journal she kept hidden beneath the floorboard, one her mother once gave her to write stories in. She hadn't touched it in months. With trembling fingers, she opened to a clean page. At the top, she wrote, "For Raya, the dog who taught me love, loyalty, and bravery." And then she began to write. Each stroke of the pen became a release, a confession, a memory. She wrote about how she first found Raya, limping, hungry, trembling with pain, her side swelling with unborn pups. She described how her heart had cracked open in that moment, not from pity, but from recognition, because she too knew what it felt like to be abandoned and afraid. She wrote about Raya's eyes, alert, golden, wild, but kind. How she'd eaten, gently from Alina's hand. How she'd followed her to the cabin, unsure but hopeful. She wrote about every battle, every scar they shared. How Raya had fought wolves twice her size. How she'd refused to leave Alina's side when she was sick, even when it meant going without food or sleep herself. She wrote about the warmth of curling beside her in winter, the comfort of her silent company, the laughter they shared when Raya chased leaves or howled at the wind. And she wrote about the end. Raw, painful, brutal, but beautiful in its sacrifice. By the time the sky had lightened, she had filled pages. The pain was still there, deep, aching. But in writing it down, she'd honored Raya, preserved her, given her life meaning beyond death. Later that morning, Alina stepped outside with the journal in hand. She walked back to the grave, sat down beside it, and began to read the pages aloud. The forest listened. The wind grew still. A deer paused, nearby. And for a moment, just a moment, Alina felt her again. Felt that familiar warmth at her side. A breeze brushed her face softly, almost like a lick. She smiled through tears. "You're still here, aren't you?" She placed a smooth stone atop the grave, her journal tucked safely under her arm. Then she stood. And this time, when she walked away, her steps were stronger. She was alone now. But never truly without Raya.